Mr. Christian's barbecue channel. Today's video is going to be on fire management. Okay, why does fire management matter when you're doing barbecue on an offset? Okay, a couple of things. If you can't manage your fire, okay, on an offset pit like this, you're going to ruin your food. Okay, barbecuing, okay, is a long process, especially when you're doing briskets or larger pieces of meat. No matter how good the meat is, okay, you might nail the prep, the cooking process, you let the meat rest. But if you can't manage a fire, you're gonna ruin your barbecue. I'm gonna teach you a couple of simple steps on how to manage a fire. What we're gonna start off with is there's three things. You need to make sure that you have seasoned wood. Okay, I'll go into much greater detail in a bit, but just keep this in mind. You need seasoned wood, cut to the appropriate size depending on your pit. You also need a heat source, and you need oxygen. So if you have those three things, okay, you can start your fire, and then from there you're going to manage your fire. Okay, and I'm going to walk you through it step by step, from beginning to end. Again, this is what works for me. I change things up periodically, okay, depending on the temperature, depending on how my pit's functioning, depending on the wood. So it can get pretty complex, okay, but my advice to you is start with the basics and just practice, okay? So again, I'm going to walk you through this step by step. Stay tuned. Okay, so first step in the process is I use a chimney. I fill it up to the top. I use lump coal, and my personal preference is lump coal because it burns a little hotter. You don't have as many fillers as you do in Kingsford briquettes. But if that's all you have, just use that. Okay, this is just my personal preference. So I'm gonna let this go for about 15-20 minutes. And once it's kind of grayed over on the top, I'm gonna be dumping it into the pit. And then from there, I'll show you what I do next. All right, everyone, so next step. So what we're gonna be doing here, as I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna be putting this lump coal into the firebox, okay? Now all I'm gonna do first, everything needs to be wide open. So I'm gonna open the door. I'm also gonna open up the door to the chamber. Some more water pans. And I'm gonna open up the stack. Now the reason I do that, as I mentioned, is there's three things that you need. Seasoned wood, a heat source, and plenty of oxygen. Okay, so that'll give me a good start. So what I'm gonna do now is, before I grab this thing, I'm gonna put on my heat gloves. Otherwise, I'll be heading to urgent care instead of making some barbecue. So I always want to make sure that you have some gloves on so you don't burn yourself. All right, so from here, I'm gonna grab this. I'm gonna put it in here. And then, what I'm gonna do from here is I'm gonna grab some of the smaller pieces, okay? Now when it comes to wood, as I mentioned earlier, it needs to be seasoned. It needs to be the right size. So what I like to do, as long as it fits through the door horizontally, and then I like to use it, okay? So I use multiple pieces depending on where I'm at in the cook. To get it started, I'm gonna use some of these skinnier pieces. The diameter is about maybe as thick as your wrist, maybe about 12, 13 inches long. So again, I'm gonna put it in here, and these are considered my channel locks, okay? So I like to kind of keep these separate, and then I'm gonna go horizontally, and I'm just gonna kind of build a little structure. Make sure there's plenty of oxygen, and I like to get a good coal bed. Okay, that's the reason I do that, is I add a lot of wood so I can start developing that coal bed. That's going to help me later on in my cook. So as you can see, smoke's already coming out because the wood's heating up. It's going to smolder for a little bit. That's okay. Just make sure you have everything open, and within a couple of minutes you'll see that I'll have a pretty good sized fire going in the firebox. All right. Why don't you come around and get a shot of that? Okay, so as you can see, I have a couple of logs in there. Wood's already igniting. Doors are wide open. You're gonna see some smoke, as I mentioned. That's normal, and that's okay. I just want to make sure that everything ignites, and within a couple of minutes, I'll have a pretty good sized fire. At that point, I'll start shutting the doors down. I'm gonna give it a couple of minutes, and I'll be right back. Okay, so as you can see, we have full ignition and all of these different logs, and so all I'm going to do from here, I'm going to close the door just a little bit. I'm still going to make sure that I have plenty of oxygen going into that fire, so I'm going to leave the door slightly open, and from here I'm going to start shutting. I'm going to shut my door to the chamber. I'm also going to add a couple of logs to the top of the firebox, and that's just to preheat the wood. When I do need it, it'll just make it a lot easier for me to put it in the firebox. So I'm going to let it go, and I'll be back. All right, so it's been about 30 minutes since I put the logs in the firebox. Now, normally, I usually cook at 275. Now, during the summer, this pit would easily be at 275. But because it's really cold out here, okay, I just checked the temperature right now, it's at 20 degrees. It's taking a little bit longer to heat the pit up. So you gotta take that into consideration. This is a 1/4 inch thick steel, and it being so cold out, it's gonna take a little bit longer to heat up. So always make sure that you give yourself enough time when trying to get your pit up to temp. So what I'm gonna do, right now, over here I'm at about 200, okay? And it's been a half hour. So what I need to do is I'm gonna check the fire, and I might have to throw on another stick, okay, just to kind of help get things going. So I'm gonna open this up. I'm gonna let you guys check it out. So you can see that that's the original fire. I'm just gonna kind of break things up a little bit. Now this is, as I mentioned, gonna give me that cold bed. I personally prefer to go higher than my cooking temp, and then I'm gonna settle into my cooking temp, which is 275. So I'm okay with it going up to like 300 and then it coming down to about 275. But I'm gonna do right here, I'm gonna keep that as it is. You can see there's 2 channel locks here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my gloves. I'm gonna throw on another piece. Now for me, from my experience, I need to have a fire going. Okay, I just can't rely on one log being in there or just on the coal bed because the fire fizzles out. So I always need to see flames, okay? Now, let's just say, for example, the fire's too big and my temperature starts to spike, then I'm gonna open the door. Then at that point, I start controlling my temperature using the door, okay? Because I wanna make sure I'm running a clean fire, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and dump this in there. Let it ignite. You see, it's not gonna take too long because I had this up here. So it's already preheated. I'm gonna give it a couple of minutes. I'm gonna repeat the process. Once it ignites, I'm gonna shut the door probably about halfway, and then give it another minute or two, then I'll shut the door completely. So I'm gonna go ahead and just start shutting this door. And even as I shut it, you can see that sometimes that can help. Okay, now it's completely on fire. So I'm gonna go ahead and just shut this door, and then give it about 10-15 minutes. Then I'm going to check the gauges again and just see where we're at. Again, because it's so cold, it takes a while for this thing to heat up. So again, I can't emphasize, just make sure you give yourself enough time. Sometimes when it's super cold, I give myself 2 hours to make sure that I have it where I want it, 275, and that I have a nice big cold bed. Okay? So I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. And I'm finally at 275. Why don't you come closer and take a look at the gauge. So as I mentioned earlier, the pit's still trying to even itself out. So as you can see here, this one's at 250. This one over here is creeping towards 300, and that's okay. Maybe another 15-20 minutes, these will kind of even out. But let me show you fire. It's a clean fire, guys. There is no smoke. Okay, so what you're after is transparent smoke. You know, you might see some waves, but again, very faint. So that's exactly what you want. And again, the reason you want that is because that produces the best barbecue. Okay, if you have thick smoke, your food will taste bitter. If you have that, you're getting your heat from the wood, and at the same time, you're getting those compounds that are going to flavor your food. So let me just show you the fire. You'll notice, the fire's going, and that's exactly what I want. I want to see flames. It's not a raging fire, but good fire where I can keep my pit where I want it to be. Now what I'm going to do going forward is to maintain that fire. Once it drops to about 260, 265, I'm going to use some of these smaller pieces. Might even use something maybe a little longer, but it's going to be about, it's going to be like this. It's not going to be a big piece of wood. That's just to maintain a consistent temp. I can use something a little bit bigger, and if I do, I could use something like this. Now, if my temperature starts to climb too high, then I'm going to have to open up the door and manage the temperature that way. But if you have the time and you're willing to hang out by the pit, or come back every 20-30 minutes, you can put one of these smaller pieces in. Okay, this is maybe 6 to 8 inches. So again, guys, primary focus of the video was fire management. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I do. Every time I come out here and I cook on my pit, it's always a learning experience. There's so many different variables. And if you like what you see, please leave a comment. Give me a like. At the same time, if you want to see more videos, please subscribe to the channel. Any questions, comments, please leave them below. Until then, you guys have a good one.